back here in one of our classrooms. We had a Vesper service, prayer service on a Wednesday night, and there were about 11, 12 of us who were gathered for a class in the back. And so in a sense, something like that could happen anywhere. It happened in Charleston, it happened in this particular church there. Many people are speculating about the reasons, whether there's racism involved, and clearly it seems to be the case. On the other hand, it's clearly just something which is senseless, violent, and it really should make each of us look into our own hearts, actually. St. Paul in the Epistle to the Romans today says that hope will not disappoint. While I grieve, I hope. But the hope that St. Paul speaks about is nothing other or no one other than Jesus Christ. And as Christians, as Orthodox Christians, we know that that is where our hope lies. It lies in Jesus Christ. But perhaps more importantly, we have to look to see in what or in which does our hope lie? What is it about Jesus Christ? And at the end of the epistle that we heard today, St. Paul says, "For scarcely for a righteous man will one die, yet perhaps for a good man someone would even dare to die. But God demonstrates his own love toward us in that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Much more then, having now been justified by his blood, we shall be saved from wrath through him. For if when we were enemies we were reconciled to God through the death of his Son, much more, having been reconciled, shall we be saved by his life." So we know that in Christ God has poured out his love for his creation. And St. Paul uses some rather startling language when he says that while we were enemies of God, God still loved us. And this, of course, provides for us, shows each of us this perhaps almost impossible example of the love that each of us should show one another, that we should have for other people, and that even perhaps speaking rhetorically, we should have toward our enemies, because I dare perhaps say that if understood correctly, Christians have no enemies. We show kindness, mercy, love to everyone. And this is the hope that we have, that this same love that has been shown by God in Christ can actually be shown by each of us. If through his death we're reconciled to God out of his great love, so much more are we reconciled to God and to one another through the risen Christ. But having lived, relatively a short time upon this world, 47 years now, moving on 48, I recognize that this takes incredible sacrifice. It means a setting aside of one's own will. It means setting aside one's own ambitions, one's own temptations to be hurt by others, to be offended by others, to live a life which is dedicated to Christ and the love of neighbor, the love of even one's enemy, takes a very denial of one's own life, ultimately. We don't know exactly how these people died in terms of what was going on at that moment. But we saw from their families, their friends, we saw from spouses, their loved ones, parents. We We saw an incredible example of the hope that they have in Christ when they unfortunately didn't stand directly before this young man, but in the video, when they said that they forgave him. What a setting aside of one's own notions of justice and vengeance and all of these sorts of things that we so easily can be gripped with on an occasion like this. So when we have a tragedy, as we've seen this past week, we mourn, we lament the loss of life, we lament the violence. We have to ask ourselves, what is it about our society, our world, which leads to such things? We can't forget that we, as a nation, not just the South or people who would want to fly the Confederate battle flag or whatever it might be, but we as a nation are incredibly violent. Killing people around the world, even now, drone strikes, all of these different things. Our police themselves have become militarized. Look around. Even when I go to Greenville Memorial Hospital, when I first went there 15 years ago, there were Barneys all around. No guns. You're walking around. Now you see guys with jackboots and weaponry. It really is incredible. The violence around us, or the potential for violence. But we as Christians, we have to be nonviolent. The only violence that we will endure is the violence of the cross, which is a sign of self-denying love on behalf of the other. And ultimately, we each have to look into our own lives. Because once again, it would be easy to blame violence, hatred, enmity, wickedness on someone else. But think of maybe one person in your own life that you're at enmity with. If you're a Christian, why aren't you at peace with that person right now? And if you aren't, why aren't you going after liturgy today and making sure you're at peace with that person? You're sure you don't think you would go murder someone over this. But this wickedness, this evil, it was there in a seed form, and it doesn't take much for it to sprout and to grow. So each of us has to look into our own lives and you root out any enmity, any hatred, any hostility. We have to be willing, desirous, and attempting to be at peace with everyone. Alexander Solzhenitsyn has an incredibly powerful quotation that I think is appropriate at a time like this, especially when, in the wake of such a tragedy, it would be easy to point fingers at so many other people or institutions or whatever. But he says, the line separating good and evil passes not through states, nor between classes, nor between political parties either, but right through every human heart. So may God give each of us the desire, the power, the grace to be those who are instruments of His healing, who fight against violence, injustice, and are dedicated to being at peace with one another, with those around us, but even trying to make, to the extent that it's possible in a fallen world, to make our society more peaceful. Shaughnessy sent me this morning a link to a website that was showing that the churches in Charleston were going to ring bells at 10 o'clock. And you asked me, should we do this? And I was sitting there early this morning. Again, I'm impressed you're up as early as I am this morning. At 10 o'clock, well, how can we do this? Well, I think it's roughly the Thursday at 10 o'clock. So, in suggestion, and we decided we'll ring a toll for each of the departed, or 9 of them, followed by, sort of as usual, a memorial toll, and then during the augmented litany, the litany